Hi, and welcome once again to Infusion Now. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Park. With me again today is who? Mark Keys, Vice President of Infusion Ministries, running the controls today back there. Fred Freed and Kurt Crochelle. Appreciate those guys. We looked last time we were together at some of the background of Isaiah, and we looked also at the reliability of Scripture. I have a little artifact I'd like to open with today. This is from the time of Isaiah. Of course, we're focusing on Isaiah's identity today. And this looks like some earrings, or it looks like a bracelet.
It does.
But it's not.
No, that's your first,
It's actually money. It's currency from about 2,700 years ago. I don't know if you remember the old Ten Commandments movie by Cecil B. DeMille. Do you remember that?
No, but I remember Charlton Heston.
Do you?
That's always Charlton Heston.
Yeah, he was the big star, and they had great special effects. I mean, for the day, walking through the Red Sea was, quite a remarkable thing. And for a long time, Universal Studios had this little section where you could go through the Red Sea at the Universal Studios.
Yeah, those days are gone.
But there was a scene in that movie where, Moses has left the courts of Pharaoh. He was there 40 years or so, and now he's in the wilderness. He's just a common shepherd.
Yeah.
And he's just starting out. He sold all of the sheep to the character that they have, fictional character in the movie, Lugal. And there's this little shot where he sells all of the sheep to one guy, and they show this little stick, this pole. It looks like a walking cane. Yeah. But on the walking cane are all these little rings.
Yeah.
And what was depicted in that film is actually historically accurate. It was those rings, that money, that bronze currency. And that's how they used to collect and buy and sell and trade. And they would just store it on their walking stick. Yeah. And share all that to kind of take you back in time. So we're traveling back some 2,600 years. We're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. And we're going to see the relationship between Isaiah and his cousin, the king Uzziah. And it's really significant. We often don't view that prophets of God would have identity issues. But we're all born in sin.
Yeah.
And we all learned how to operate in this world and develop false identity equations.
Yeah.
And Isaiah developed a really dangerous identity equation. He developed a system of looking at his cousin the king and thinking that's as good as it could be.
Yeah.
Mark, read for us Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. Something really alarming happens in just the opening verse.
Yeah, Isaiah 6, verse 1. And it was in the year King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple.
We can't get more dramatic than that.
Yeah.
In the year of King Uzziah's death, this king dies, and suddenly Isaiah can see God. So, when we read Scripture, we should be inquisitive. We should be like the old Sherlock Holmes with our deductive reasoning and ask ourselves, what's going on? What's happening behind the scenes? Why does this king die, or why does he have to die? How come his death allows Isaiah to see God in this dramatic way? And perhaps maybe the first time Isaiah is really seeing God as lofty and exalted, where the train of his robe is filling the temple. He's getting a vision of angels, seraphim, angelic beings that have 6 wings, and the holiness of God is the theme here. And God is so holy that these angels are covering their face, they're covering their feet, and they're flying, and they won't even touch the threshold where Isaiah is viewing God. God's enthroned on a throne, and the angels won't even touch the ground where God's enthroned. How holy is God?
Yeah.
When you see the scenes, sometimes I refer back to the book of Daniel, when the angel came to reveal to Daniel the interpretation of a dream of the coming Messiah at the issue of a decree to rebuild the temple. So many months and so many days will go by. The Messiah will be cut off outside the city of Jerusalem. He's revealing this astonishing news. But when the angel comes, Daniel, who's perhaps one of the most godly men in Scripture, faints. He passes out because the presence of the angel reflects the holiness of God.
And here you see these people encounter the Lord, but this was so descriptive here in Isaiah 6. It was amazing how descriptive it was, and it was almost like he had so much focus on his cousin And what his cousin did some amazing things. I mean, in the history, 52 years, and what he invented and did was amazing. And then he died, but then Isaiah had such a revelation, and what he saw here vividly with his eyes was incredible.
I don't think he has that revelation until he grapples with the fact that his hero,
Right.
his cousin, the king, is gone.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of the history. If you're looking for history in the scripture, you want to go to Chronicles.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at 2 Chronicles, starting in verse 26. Mark, just there in verse 1, tells us the age that Uzziah became king. How old was he?
Oh, 16. I can't imagine. 16 years old, and you're king.
We kind of struggle because now we've traded in one old leader for another old leader, and we're wondering, if these guys are too old to run our country. But I bet if we put a 16-year-old in as president, everybody would freak out.
Yeah, that would be
That would be too much. We have laws actually against that you have to be a certain age. But here we find the monarchy, the kingship, falls to Isaiah when he's 16. But the scripture says some remarkable things about his 52-year reign. It says that he did what was right in the eyes of God in verse 3. In other words, he was a godly king, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's good to hear off the bat about his character. Right off that he follow the Lord.
If you contrast and you get out your list of kings, you got your bad kings and your good kings, and you're like, man, look at all these bad kings. It's neat that we find that Uzziah was one of the good kings. He was a well-balanced man. So he loved God. He did what was right in the eyes of God. But he also was a man that understood the importance of protecting the people.
Yeah.
So he had a military. If you look on around about verse 11, you'll find that he had 2,600 fighting men. These are kind of like generals. And under their reign, under their command, rather, was an army of 307,500 men.
Yeah, that's, we think, well, we see armies and what happens today in our culture today, but boy, this was amazing.
That's a massive army. In the ancient world, just to give you a point of reference, earlier in a program that Kurt and I did, we talked about the Assyrians laying siege to Jerusalem, and the Assyrians had an army of 185,000. 185,000 was enough. Assyrians could conquer most of the known world with that. Here, Uzziah is almost doubling that.
Well, he focused on military. He wanted a secure nation, a secure borders. He wanted everything secure there, so he really focused on building. He also built war machines.
Yeah, we think this was the catapult.
Yeah.
So, oftentimes, how did the catapult get invented? How was it created? The lever system, or the trebuchet, if you are French, taking large objects and propelling them through the air. The primary means of defending cities were large walls.
And you had
if
knocked
you
the
breached
walls
the
down.
wall, you were in.
And you had to get,
And so he had not only great military might and conquering those regions, when he did so, long before the Romans ever did it, we believe that the ancient kings of the world did it, he would bring back into Jerusalem the bounty, the spoils of war. And so prisoners, all of the produce, cattle, and things were brought, and the prosperity of the people of Israel was through the roof.
Yeah.
They had a great sense of peace. Nobody's going to stand against this army. Nobody's going to even challenge Uzziah. He also had enough sense to realize that just a strong army isn't enough. He was an agricultural king.
Yeah.
The scripture goes on to reveal that he was one who built cisterns, wells.
Well, yeah.
So he understood that if you're going to farm and if you're going to have plenty vegetables and fruits and different things, you need a system of having water in this incredibly arid region. Most of Israel, with the exception of the northern portion of Galilee and that valley, is desert. But he had wells and cisterns for flocks and for produce, and he was an agricultural king. This is really rare in the ancient world, where you find this kind of balance. So engines of war, a great army, cisterns and crops and agriculture. Something happened, though. He became proud. And the scripture reveals in Isaiah that he died. Why did he die? it was because of this incident. It was because of this pride. We find it talked about in 2 Chronicles 26, and we get to the point where it says simply this: but after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall.
Yeah, what a way to start off. I mean, you talk about all these accomplishments, and then you get to verse 16, and then when he became powerful, he became proud. What is it about those two words? You're powerful, you're mighty, and then the opposite of that is what? Pride.
Well, what we begin to do is take credit for what God has done in our life.
Yeah.
And all of the accomplishments that you have and all the accomplishments that I have really are the Lord.
Right.
And when we begin to take credit for what God's done, we're on our way down. And the scripture just simply says pride comes before a fall.
Yeah.
This mighty king who had as king so many rights and privileges, but one of the things, unless you are a priest king like Melchizedek or like Jesus, you couldn't go into the temple and operate as priest even if you were king. And he did that. He goes into the temple and he offers the articles of incense. Incidentally, these same articles of incense are going to cleanse Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6. These articles of incense are offered. He takes them as king. He has no right to his priest. There are probably several hundred priests there who are saying, my king, no, this is not your place. Step back. He doesn't. He grabs the articles of incense. He begins to do what only a priest can do in the presence of God, in the inner chamber, in the Holy of Holies. And we find that leprosy breaks out in his forehead. Leprosy is when you stop feeling. It's a symptom of his heart condition. His heart had hardened and not become sensitive to God, and now his flesh, literally on his forehead, falls off. Can you imagine the priest seeing this picture of their king with literally his forehead gone as leprosy strikes instantaneously?
And you know what's really interesting about that? You see these kings, and you see wicked. You know, sometimes you could read this. You read this about him, and you're like, man, why did God do that? And then you see other wicked kings that went for years, and they did wickedness, and they disobeyed God, and it seems like God didn't do anything to them. But right here, we see where he had this major, and it was wrong. Obviously it was wrong, but then all of a sudden, boom, he breaks out with leprosy. And it's like, man, he did all these amazing things. Why all of a sudden, just because he did? Sometimes we're in a culture where we weigh things out. Well, look at all these good things, and then he did one bad thing and he was gone.
Yeah, we minimize sin.
Yes,
we minimize one bad thing. Pride. Pride got Satan expelled from heaven.
There's a difference.
Pride,
you have to look at the
pride
sin
is
here.
a serious thing. Pride is that sense of saying, I can do this independent of God. Well, the second we attempt to live independent of God and on our own, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done. Well, Isaiah watched as his cousin, the mighty king who'd conquered all of the known world, who had an army of over 300,000, who had cisterns and catapults and welled up in pride, offered those articles of incense, and he was escorted outside the city. The king had to live not in his palace, but had to live outside the city where the lepers live.
At Colony, yeah.
And there
Outcast, yeah.
he died.
Yeah, sad.
When we come back on our next episode of Infusion Now, we're going to talk about how that death led to an incredible vision for Isaiah, and how Isaiah needed to, in a sense, destroy that false identity equation, the worship of his cousin the king, and put his worship at one place and one place only, on God. Well, we hope you stay tuned as we continue in our study of Isaiah's true identity. Right now, God bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, and give you peace.